is 10 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. This is a meeting of the Fifth Management Plan's turf breakout group. We appreciate you all being here today. Thank you for logging in. We're going to be covering a lot of information today, but before we get started, I'm going to have McKenna Welsh run through some ground rules for how you all can participate in this meeting. McKenna?
Thank you, Natalie. Good morning, everyone. So I will be going over the webinar logistics. Please remain muted unless you are speaking. If you would like to speak, just type your name in the chat and we will call on people in the order that they type their name. If you would prefer to have your questions or comments read aloud instead, you can also type those into the chat and we'll be reading those throughout the meeting. When you do type in your questions or comments, please send those to everyone in the chat so that they do not get missed. And if you're having any technical difficulties, you can contact the ADWR help desk, and their phone number and email are on the slide. This meeting and the chat will both be recorded. Next slide. So we've launched these Google Form questionnaires that we have been providing with our subgroup meetings. They have questions that are related to the concepts discussed in each of our subgroup and breakout meetings. They also have a space for general meeting feedback as well. The link here is on the slide, and then I'm going to add it into the chat as well, so you can click on it there. If you're planning on using the form to provide feedback, we ask that you try to fill it out within a week of the meeting. If it's been much longer than that, you can just send your feedback to us through email, which is always fine. And that's managementplans@azwater.gov. Next slide. And then one other new thing that we are rolling out to help get more feedback during the presentation are these timers. And so there's question slides that will be presented throughout the meeting. Each slide will have a 1-minute timer on the slide, and that will just make sure that we pause for at least a minute to allow people to gather their thoughts and questions. This timer that's running on the slide right now is an example of what it looks like. We know that these meetings cover a lot of information, so we just want to provide more time for you all to develop any questions or comments you may have. And with that, I will hand it back to Natalie. Thank you.
All right, thank you, McKenna. So as I said, this is a meeting of the Fifth Management Plans Work Group, or this is the turf breakout. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different things today. My name is Natalie Mast. I am the program manager working on management plans at ADWR. You just heard from McKenna Welsh. She's running kind of the back end of the webinar today, helping mute and unmute people and that type of thing. We also have Maggie Martin with us today. She's going to be helping with some of the chat box and helping take comments from you all. And we also have Amanda Long Rodriguez with us today, who will be sharing a lot of information throughout today's presentation. So thank you to all of our other ADWR staff that are helping out. Let's go to the next slide, please. So we are going to be covering a lot of information today. We wanted to use this meeting to spend a little more time talking about the proposal that we first introduced at our last meeting of this group, going into some more detail, providing a little bit more clarity on the details of that proposal and the types of things that we kind of still need to work out to figure out kind of the details and everything for that proposal. We are going to also be talking about a few additional things that will need to be nailed down for the fifth management plans, introducing some conversations on effluent and allotment additions and allowing some time for additional feedback on those items. So we've got a lot on the agenda today, so we can go ahead and dive in. Just to recap a little bit from previous meetings, if we could go to the next slide, please. So we have covered a lot in these meetings already. We know that the existing conservation programs for turf and particularly for golf courses were really complicated. So something we've been working toward in redesigning this program for the fifth management plans is that the application rates be data driven, that it be simple to understand and communicate, and also that it achieves or is designed to achieve reductions in withdrawals of groundwater. So that last item, if you've been to these meetings, that's something you've heard 100 times. Reductions in withdrawals of groundwater is part of our statutory framework for the management plans, and that's something that's really important to keep in mind as our guiding principle here as we work through this process. So again, today we are going to have a continued discussion of the fifth management plan conservation program for golf courses. But in future meetings, will also have to get into some further discussions of other turf-related facilities and what we're going to see for conservation requirements for those types of facilities. So we'll introduce a little bit of that conversation today as well, but we're mostly going to be focusing on the golf courses today. With that, we can go to the next slide, please. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Amanda. She's going to go into a little bit more detail on this proposal for the golf course conservation programs for the fifth management plans, and allow some time for discussion and questions. Amanda?
Good morning, everybody. So my name is Amanda Long Rodriguez, and I am the program coordinator for the Management Plans Group. So we introduced a proposed allotment calculation method for golf courses at the previous turf subgroup meeting. We did have some feedback about the proposal, so we want to bring that proposal back, clarify some of the questions that there were, and then go through each AMA to see how the proposal might apply there. So as a reminder, when we are developing the conservation programs for the fifth management plan, this is the statute that we're working under. So as Natalie said, we've heard this a couple of times, so I'm going to say it for the 101st time, that the plan should include a continuing mandatory conservation program, and it should be designed to achieve reductions in withdrawals of groundwater. So when designing a turf conservation program for golf courses, we wanted to keep in mind this needs and wants list. We needed to have a program that would reduce withdrawals of groundwater, that was balanced and reasonable between all the current golf course categories. And frankly, we needed a program to be more transparent, to be easier for everyone to understand, and we have attempted to do this through simplifying the program. We also wanted to streamline all the current categories, all the additions, limitations on the program, which can be confusing and difficult to understand. And then also part of this wants was to also update the application rates and in a way that included realistic practices. So at that last meeting, we had Dr. Paul Brown present to you some of the science behind this, and we kept this in mind as we designed the proposed allotment calculation method. So in the last meeting, we used the Phoenix AMA as an example, as it was our largest data set for golf courses. So I'm going to start today with the Phoenix AMA to describe the structure of the allotment calculation method. So we did receive feedback about how this method was originally described. So I just wanted to clarify that this is an allotment calculation method. It's a proposed way that ADWR would calculate the allotment for each golf course. But as it is in the current program, there would be no requirement to apply the water in this exact same way that the allotment is calculated. So courses would still be able to apply the allotment to their courses as they see fit. Our goal here is also to reduce the withdrawals of groundwater at an AMA level. So when talking about this proposal, that might mean that some courses may get an increase in allotment while others may see a decrease, depending on the characteristics of the course. And again, the goal here was to decrease the AMA-wide withdrawals of groundwater. So to recap the proposal, in line with simplifying, the proposal would change the course category types in the current program. The current 4 MP categories are generally determined by date and the course, the date the course was built, and depending on the AMA, if it was a regulation course or not. The proposed 5 MP calculation method would simplify the categories to 2. One that is for courses that are below 5 acres per hole, and one that is for courses that are above 5 acres per hole. And this method was designed to encourage courses to get their water use to at or below 5 acres per hole, and you'll see that in the application limits. So this proposal will calculate 3 categories of turf and then also have a calculation for water surface area. So I'll first address those turfed acres in each new proposed course category. So for courses under 5 acres per hole, turf category 1 or overseeded acres would be calculated at a rate of 5.84, and that would be limited to 3.6 acres per hole. Turf category 2 or the non-overseeded acres would be calculated at a rate of 4.22, and this would be limited to those acres between 3.6 and 5 acres. And there would be no category 3, as all the acres would be accounted for in those first 2 categories. For courses that are over 5 acres per hole, turf category 1 or the overseeded acres would be calculated at a rate of 5.84 again, but this limitation would be at 2.8 acres per hole. For turf category 2, it would be calculated again at a rate of 4.22, and this would be limited to those acres between 2.8 and 5 acres. And then for turf category 3, or those that are over 5 acres per hole, it would be calculated at a rate of 2.5, and this would be limited to 5 acres per hole. So the water surface area has changed slightly from what I presented at the last meeting, and this is to account for a 4th management plan rule that limits new water surface acres added after a certain year. So our proposal would just carry forward this rule from the 4th management plan. The year that the water surface area is limited is different by AMA. In the Phoenix AMA, this would limit water surface areas that are added after 1989 to 0.14 acres per hole. And this would be the same for both proposed course categories. So using this proposal, we did find that in the Phoenix AMA, this proposal meets both of our goals of reducing withdrawals of groundwater, and it also simplifies the program in a way that is still equitable to the original 4 course categories. So in the next slides, I'm going to go through each of the AMAs to see how this proposal structure might apply. We went through the same exercise as we did for the Phoenix AMA, applying the specific AMA data to the proposal and tweaking the proposal where necessary to fit the AMA. This method will always keep the same structure I described here, a above and below 5 acres per hole course category, the same 3 turf categories, and then a water surface area calculation. And as I go through each AMA, I'm going to explain that any differences there are to the allotment calculation method. So the first is the Prescott AMA, and again, the structure of the allotment calculation method is the same. The difference in the Prescott AMA is the application rates. So Prescott is a little bit different from the other AMAs as their climate is slightly different from the other AMAs. So to account for that, we adjusted the application rate by the effective precipitation of grass. In calculating the irrigation requirement for ag, the management plans include effective precipitation as a component in the formula. But the Prescott AMA is the only AMA where effective precipitation, is actually included in their calculation. So we thought it would be reasonable to consider effective precipitation in the application rates for the Prescott AMA. So this leaves the application rates for turf category 1 and 2 slightly lower at 5.24 and 3.62. Turf category 3 was also not a category that exists in the Prescott AMA, so we carried that forward for the 5th management plan proposal. The other difference in the Prescott AMA is the water surface application rate, and this was just adjusted to match the application rate in the 4th management plan. And then we also included that same water surface area limit for new water surface areas added, but that date is 1984, and that's again to align with the 4th management plan. So once we applied the Prescott AMA golf course data, we found that the proposed 5 MP allotments, although lower than the 4th plan, they were also lower than the average use of the golf courses in the Prescott AMA. So in the Prescott AMA, this proposal would reduce the withdrawals of groundwater, and it was also done in a way that was equitable for the previous 4 MP course categories. In the Pinal AMA, we actually made very few changes as compared to the Phoenix AMA proposal, and this is attributed to the fact that the program and the course categories under the 4 MP are also similar. The only thing that does differ here is the limit on new water surface area added. In the Pinal AMA 4th management plan, that limit for new water surface areas is those that are added after 1985. So this was also carried forward in the proposed calculation method. And when we ran the golf course data for the Pinal AMA with this proposal, we found that using the structure, it did show a reduction in withdrawals of groundwater, and in a way that was equitable among the 4 MP Pinal course categories. So Tucson was a little bit different than the rest of the AMAs. The calculation method was very similar to the Phoenix AMA in terms of turf application rates and the limits. But there are 3 differences here. The first is that turf category 3 was not included in the Tucson AMA proposal. This is not a category that's included in their 4th management plan, so we carried that forward. The application rate for water surface areas in the 4th management plan was 5.8 acre feet per acre, and the limit for new water surface area was those added after 1991. So we added both of these to the proposed method for Tucson. And so when we use the Tucson golf course data and apply that to the proposed method, we found that the method did reduce withdrawals of groundwater, but not necessarily in a way that was equitable for all Tucson's 4 MP course categories. But when we dug to this data a little bit further, we did find that the courses that would be most adversely impacted are those courses that use 100% renewable supplies, meaning that they would not be subject to the conservation requirements. So as long as they continue to be on 100% renewable supplies, they may not be impacted by the change in this allotment calculation. So once we did remove the courses that were 100% effluent or renewable sources, we did find that this proposal would be equitable. So the Santa Cruz AMA proposal is identical to the Tucson AMA. So as compared to the Phoenix AMA proposal, there are the same 3 differences. Turf category 3 was removed from the calculation, and water surface area application rate was 5.8, and the water surface area that is added after 1991 is limited to 0.14 acres per hole. So under this proposal, using the Santa Cruz golf course data, we found that the proposed calculation method would reduce withdrawals of groundwater, and that reduction was equitable between the current 4th management plan course categories. So one thing that we've also created to help with understanding the proposal for golf courses is to create this calculator. So I will show it to you here. So this calculator will give each course an idea of what their allotment might be under this proposal. It's a simple Excel file where you can enter the course information, and it will calculate your proposed 5 MP allotment. So here in the white spaces, you would enter your course information, and then that would populate these gray boxes here with your allotment information. So for an example, I'll enter some course information, turfed acres, number of holes, water surface acres, and a date when the course was built. And then when you choose an AMA, it populates the gray boxes with the course category and the acre feet under each turf category, as well as the water surface area acre feet. And the total proposed allotment there in the bold box here. I also wanted to note that this calculator does not include any allotment additions or adjustments, and as well, it does not account for the date when the water surface area was added. It instead assumes a year based on when the course was built. So this calculator will give you an idea of what your course's allotment might be under this proposal, but including specific dates and allotment additions could change this number. It also includes this second tab here, which kind of gives a summarized version of everything I just presented in one place. And there are also some resources down here. So it's the previous meeting that we presented this information, and then I'll go ahead and link today's meeting information after we finish today. So this calculator will eventually be available on our new 5MP Concepts webpage, which is a single location where all the other proposed concepts and programs will be linked. That page isn't quite ready yet, so until it's ready in a few weeks, the calculator will be posted alongside today's meeting presentation on the Fifth Management Plan Work Group meeting page. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop there and start our first question slide. Again, this timer is in place to just give you a little bit more time to fill out questions and type them in so we don't move on too quickly. So let that full timer run and then start reading questions if there are any. All right, was there any questions or comments?
Thanks, Amanda. No questions or comments. Oh, sorry, just a question here came through from Bree. She's commented, why was the 5.84 rate, which is 80% DU, chosen for the base allotment under this proposal rather than the 75% DU rate of 6.23, which Dr. Brown recommended?
This is Natalie. Maybe I was remembering Dr. Brown's recommendation differently. But in any case, what we did with the numbers here was we evaluated kind of what we could do with this structure to meet all of the expressed goals that we talked about earlier. So kind of the most critical component of that being this calculation structure needs to be designed to reduce withdrawals of groundwater. So ultimately what we're working with here is trying to find a calculation to assign the conservation allotments that is reasonable, that kind of makes sense, but is also kind of based on that data and allows some level of overseeding, acknowledgement that overseeding is a thing that occurs at golf courses. So maybe that's not a terribly direct answer to the question, but ultimately we were kind of trying to balance acknowledging that overseeding and this updated data that Dr. Brown provided, balance that with our need to design this to reduce withdrawals of groundwater.
Thank you, Natalie. Question here from Jeff Lee. I don't remember if you said if the new Phoenix AMA rules would reduce withdrawals.
Yes, it would. I can go back to that slide. Phoenix. So Phoenix both reduced withdrawals of groundwater, and it was in a way that was equitable.
Thank you, Amanda. I don't see any additional questions or comments. A comment here comes through from Bree. She's wondering, can we go back to water surface and explain the limitation and how that differs from the third management plan?
Sure. So Amanda, if you could go back to that slide. And maybe, I'm not remembering exactly where that was in the presentation.
It's on every slide at the bottom.
Okay. So the water surface acreage limitations, we at this point have not recommended making any changes to those limitations from the third to the fourth to the fifth management plans. So the details there are pretty complicated, depending on when which AMA we're talking about and when water surface acres were added to a course or when the course was built. There might be different limitations in place, or there might be no limitations in place on that allotment associated with those water surface acres. So it's a little hard to answer that very directly without spending a lot of time on it. But there is a limitation in each AMA starting at a certain year, and unfortunately that year is different in each AMA. It ranges from, I believe, 1989 to 1991 or something like that. So those limitations are a little bit confusing and complicated. But I guess the moral of that story there is we are not at this point recommending making any changes to those limitations on water surface acres between the third management plan or the fourth management plan to the fifth management plans.
Thank you, Natalie. No additional questions or comments.
Okay, so there are, we'll move on here to the next topic. There's a couple other items we wanted to consider for the turf conservation programs. So in this section, I'm going to talk about the effluent adjustment, and then I'll pass it off to Natalie to talk about flex accounts and then also allotment additions. So in the fourth management plan, the effluent adjustment is available for all turf facilities in all AMAs. This allows any acre feet of effluent or reclaimed water that is used to be counted as 0.6 or 0.7 acre feet, depending on the AMA. So in considering a potential adjustment for the fifth management plans, we want to acknowledge a couple of things. In the past, effluent was considered a lower quality water or kind of throwaway water that wastewater treatment plants were trying to get rid of. Several of the past management plans also describe effluent as something that's underutilized. But now, especially in this industrial sector, effluent's no longer a water source that is underutilized. We also want to consider the change in the value of effluent. There have been advances in research and technology that have changed the way effluent can be used. A couple of things have also happened in Arizona that support this change in the value of effluent. In 1972, the Department of Health released the first reclaimed water rules in Arizona. In 1989, the Supreme Court ruled that cities could dispose of their effluent water as they see fit, rather than returning it to the river for downstream uses. This ruling meant that cities could sell their effluent, and that effluent could and did indeed have a different value. In 2001, ADDEQ made updates to the reclaimed water rules, and these rules further encouraged the use of effluent. And then finally, in 2018, the 2001 rules were further revised, and under these new rules, effluent could be permitted to be used as potable water, the city of Scottsdale being the first city permitted to do so. So in determining the effluent adjustment for the 5th management plans, we wanted to consider the changes to the value of effluent and also the fact that all sources of water are valuable in Arizona, while also understanding that effluent is of a lower quality and its use does result in less groundwater being used. So in this table, we show the effluent adjustment for each AMA in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th plan. In the 2nd management plan, the effluent adjustment could apply depending on how much effluent the facility used. So for example, in the Prescott AMA, which is the cutout of text there to the left, if a facility used between 50 and 89% of effluent, they were eligible for a 0.85 adjustment. If they used more than 90%, they were eligible for a 0.8 adjustment. In the 3rd management plan, the adjustment was changed to 0.6 or 0.7, depending on the AMA. And this was again to encourage the use of effluent. In the 4th management plan, the effluent adjustment was left the same. And this wasn't necessarily because the value of effluent hadn't changed, but more that we didn't have the time to fully consider changes to the adjustment in the development of the 4th plans. In the 5th management plan, considering the current and future value of effluent, our proposal is to go back to something similar to the adjustments in the 2nd management plan. So this could be a similar tiered structure to the 2nd management plan. It could be a straightforward number for any amount of effluent that is used, or we could have a different adjustment by AMA or the same adjustment across the board. And we're kind of open to suggestion and comments on how we might want to adjust this incentive. So I know that this is a topic that there's been many questions about in the past, so I'm going to stop here again for questions, and I'll start that 1-minute timer again.
And I would like to just jump in here. This is Natalie Mast again. And just say we also are seeking additional comments on this. If you'd like to take some time to consider this and look into it a little bit more, we do have some of these same questions or an opportunity for feedback on each of these items in that questionnaire that McKenna mentioned at the beginning of the meeting.
All right, did we have any questions or comments on the effluent adjustment?
Yes, thanks, Amanda. I have a comment here from Bree. She's mentioned, did it say that a course has to use 90% effluent to receive the credit?
I believe it was over 50%. So 50 to 89% got a different adjustment than if the use was greater than 90%. And this is for the Prescott 2nd management plan. It differed a little bit by AMA.
So basically the idea there was that the higher levels of use of effluent would have more of an incentive there than those using less effluent.
I see here that Chip Howard may want to speak. Chip, if you want to speak, you're welcome to unmute yourself now.
Okay, thank you. A comment about the effluent credit. Back in the 2nd management plan, where the credit value is 0.8 to 0.85, the reason that credit existed then was the recognition that the high salt load in the effluent required additional water for a leaching fraction to dispose of that salt. And what it was found was that virtually no one used effluent because that incentive wasn't enough to overcome the logistics of that leaching and using the effluent. So the reason that it was changed to the 0.6 was to provide enough incentive for someone to want to do this. So if you raise it back up to where it was originally, well, and in the third management plan, an awful lot of people designed their golf courses and built their infrastructure at great expense with this recognition in mind. So if you change it back to the way it was, and there's no longer a logistical incentive to use effluent, that's not going to end very well for a lot of people. So that's my comment.
Sure. Thanks for your comment, Chip. So there is in the fourth management plans, and we'll have a discussion about this in a few slides, an addition to a calculated allotment for leaching. So our kind of calculus here, our consideration here is that yes, there are leaching considerations associated with effluent, but we also have a separate mechanism to kind of take care of those leaching requirements under that leaching addition.
Well, but if you remove the incentive, okay, if I were running a golf course and I could choose between effluent and groundwater, I'm not sure that I would choose effluent. I may choose to use groundwater instead. So, just my.
Thanks, Chip.
Thank you, Chip, and thank you, Natalie.
Go ahead, Megan.
I have a question here from Rob Collins. He's wondering, will the effluent water quality be defined?
No, I don't believe there's any intent to do that. We don't really work as much with quality in this. It hasn't historically been defined as a part of this. However, that leaching addition that I did just mention does take into consideration the TDS, the dissolved solids of the effluent or the water source. So the leaching addition would take that water quality into consideration.
Thank you, Natalie. A couple of questions from Jeff Lee here. Wasn't the third management plan just a blanket amount that didn't matter how much water was served by effluent?
Yes, it was a straightforward number. It didn't matter how much was used. It was at 0.6 or 0.7, depending on the AMA.
And that's definitely something that we can consider for the fifth management plans. We are open to suggestion on that.
Another question here from Jeff Lee. He's wondering, if the effluent adjustment was done for leaching, why is there an additional leaching allotment?
And I guess we just kind of already touched on that in with Chip's comment, that we see that this reduction in this kind of effluent incentive or increase in the effluent adjustment, depending on how you're looking at it, it's that leaching requirement is kind of covered because you have the opportunity for an addition associated with leaching.
Thank you, Natalie. Question here from Michelle. She's wondering, will all of these proposed changes apply to all golf courses regardless of the time of construction unless specifically noted in the slide?
Right. So the new proposed structure focuses less on the date it was built and focuses more on the size of the golf course. So the idea there is that we are through that structure incentivizing golf courses to reduce their turfed acreage, because if they are under 90 acres, then they have a more generous calculation for that conservation allotment. The exception to that statement is that water surface acre line where that is still tied to the years.
Thank you, Natalie. Question here from Terry Sue. She's wondering how much additional water does the leaching requirement provide?
That's a good question. And it's not something that has a super straightforward answer. So contained in the management plans, there is a calculation for a leaching allowance. It depends on your water quality and that type of thing. So the calculation allows an addition to be formulated, but it's not necessarily going to be a flat addition across the board. So it depends on your incoming water quality and how much leaching that calculation would indicate is needed.
Thank you, Natalie. Question.
Sorry. Oh, one more thing, Maggie. Something
Sorry.
I could mention is we have not had a conversation about that particular calculation at this point. That calculation has been carried forward from a number of management plans. If there are any comments on how we might assess that calculation, we would certainly be open to that as well.
Thanks, Natalie. Comment here from Jackie Keller. She's wondering, so far effluent, reclaimed, and recycled water have been mentioned. Are these the same or different? If different, definitions would be beneficial. Also, what are the other renewable sources which have been mentioned?
Thanks, Jackie. So for the purposes of this presentation, and I know that the Department of Health and ADEQ might have different definitions for these, but for the purposes of this, we are assuming that they are all the same. The rules that I mentioned just have those different terms. In the management plans, it's sometimes in certain plans it's referred to as effluent, and in other plans it's referred to as reclaimed water, but we are using kind of one blanket term for all of them. And the other renewable sources, and Natalie, correct me if I'm wrong here, but CAP, effluent.
And there might be other sources of surface water, SRP water, for example.
Thank you, Amanda and Natalie. There are no further questions or comments right now.
All right, I'll pass that back to you then to talk about flex accounts.
Great. So something we have heard in a number of these meetings is that there was interest in having a conversation about how flex accounts are treated between management plans. Historically, those flex accounts have typically been zeroed out. You can see that language on the left-hand side of this slide that a flex account shall be established with a beginning balance of 0 acre-feet. So typically between each management plan, those flex accounts were reset to 0 when that management plan, when those conservation requirements became effective. So we've heard a lot of requests that we not necessarily continue that practice. So we would like to acknowledge and respond to that. So our proposal for the 5th management plan for plans for flex accounts would be to carry forward the flex account balances, but also to make sure that we're communicating correctly the rules around those flex account balances and how those are calculated and limited. So something important to note there is that those flex account balances are not unlimited. Those flex account balances are limited to plus or minus 20%. So that balance carried forward between the management plans and in any given year is no more than 20% of the total conservation allotment for that course. So that's not a change, that's just something to note. I believe in the past there may have been some errors in how that was calculated. So the flex account balances that you may have seen before may have looked bigger than that, but those are under the current management plans limited to plus or minus 20%. So that's just a really important thing to note as we consider establishing the strategy for flex accounts for the fifth management plans. If we could go to the next slide, please. So one thing that we wanted to kind of introduce discussions about for the fifth management plans is those allotment additions. This has already come up, so it's great that we had planned on talking about this for this meeting. So in the fourth management plans, there are a number of allotment additions, and these might vary a little bit by AMA, the exact numbers or the exact additions that are included in each management plan. So what we wanted to do here was just kind of have a list of each of those allotment additions and some kind of a recommendation for how we move forward with that allotment addition. So I'll just kind of work through this list. The first allotment addition is a revegetation allotment addition, which allowed new low water use plants a small additional allotment for their first, I am forgetting now if it was their first year or if it was for their first 3 years. In any case, under these new calculations, we no longer have an application rate, a calculation for low water use plants. So we would recommend removing that revegetation addition for the fifth management plants. The next allotment addition on this list is newly turfed area, which allowed in 1 year a small additional acre foot per acre bump to your conservation allotment for new turf. Again, for this one, we have not really seen a huge amount of utilization of this one, and under the new calculation, we didn't see this as critical. So we would recommend removing the newly turfed area allotment addition for the fifth management plans. For the allotment addition associated with filling or refilling bodies of water, this is a single year addition associated with that activity. We would recommend keeping that particular allotment addition for the fifth management plans. And then finally, with the addition for leaching, we've discussed this already a couple times throughout this meeting. We do recommend maintaining that addition for leaching, particularly with low quality waters, and kind of an acknowledgement of those changes to the effluent adjustment. So we are certainly open to feedback on any of these recommendations, but we wanted to have kind of a starting point for that conversation and to start gathering some feedback on each of these items as we move forward. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So again, we will pause for a minute and allow you all a little time to either put your comments in the chat box or to put your names in if you have any comments. And as with the previous items, there will be some questions about this on that feedback questionnaire that we mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. Thanks.
All right, question here from Andrew Hitchcock. He's wondering, is high TDS defined?
There is a definition for it in the management plans. Amanda, do you remember that number off the top of your head? I don't have that in front of me. I apologize.
I also do not know that number off the top of my head.
There is a definition for it that is used kind of for that leaching addition. That is something we could have a discussion about. That's something we're open to feedback on if that level that's defined in the management plans is appropriate. I apologize that I am not recalling that number off the top of my head, but that's something that we can come back to in a future meeting.
Question here from Jeff Lee. For refiling allotment as a single year, how does that stop being utilized multiple years in a row?
So that particular addition is limited to a single year. So it is just a one-time addition to the conservation allotment that kind of bumps up the total conservation allotment for that single year. And then in the following year, it would go back down to the previous level. I am not sure if that answered your question, but yeah, I guess you can let me know if that didn't.
Thanks, Natalie. Question here from Kathy. She's wondering, is there an accepted list of low water use plants?
Yes, that's a great question. Yes, there is. So there is that low water use term is actually a regulatory term. So we do have a regulatory low water use plant list established for each active management area. There is the URL for where that's posted is listed in each management plan, and it's available, I believe, on the AMA conservation page on our website.
Thank you, Natalie. Question here from Jeff Lee. He's wondering, for leaching, the TDS limit has always been based on the water source. Should this be done on the soil chemistry instead?
That's a great question, Jeff, and perhaps you would have more expertise on that particular item than I would. So I think that's something we can certainly be open to considering, whether there might be alternative calculations that we should be considering for that leaching allotment, or whether we might have kind of dual calculations, how exactly that might work. I am certainly not an expert on that particular calculation, and we would be absolutely open to some technical input and recommendations there.
Thank you, Natalie. Question here from Bree. She's wondering, when a golf course does an irrigation renovation on the course and have to grow back turf, does that fall under the newly turfed additional allotment?
That is a good question, and I would have to double check that language. I don't have that in front of me. I apologize. I believe it would, but I'm not positive about that. So we could, if that was something that would need to be considered, we could certainly take feedback about that.
Thanks, Natalie. A couple of questions here from Jeff Lee. He's wondering, didn't the low water use allotment get removed for the fifth management plan? Can this lower the incentive to have more planted areas?
So, right. So the low water use allotment was removed for the fifth management plans. However, since the new structure is based on turfed acreage, that additional acreage that may be owned by the course just isn't really taken into consideration for the courses, for the conservation allotment. So what the structure does is, for the turfed area that you have, if that turf area is greater than 5 acres per hole, or 90 acres for an 18-hole golf course, then you have a slightly less generous calculation for your conservation allotment. this is designed to incentivize courses to basically have a smaller turfed area. They could do that by removing turf, replacing it with low water use plants, that type of thing. So the incentive is kind of built into that structure where if you have fewer than 5 acres per hole of turf, then you have a more generous calculation for your conservation allotment.
Thank you, Natalie. Andrew Hitchcock is wondering if you can share the link to the adjustment calculator that was shown earlier in the presentation.
Sure. Anita, is that available online yet, or do we still need to post it?
It's not. I believe we're going to post it when we post the presentation. And Andrew, it's going to be where the subgroup meetings are for now, and then we are eventually going to move it to the 5MP concept pages. But I can go ahead and post a link to where the subgroup meetings is.
And we will, once that 5MP concepts page is live, we will share a link to that with the full work group. And we're also going to spend some time in our next full work group meeting kind of going over that page and what it contains and what all is on there.
Thank you, Natalie and Amanda. Bree has a follow-up comment here. She's mentioned, I think we should definitely look into the irrigation renovation before making a decision about removing that new turf allotment. I think more courses will be scheduled for renovations in the upcoming years.
Thank you, Bree.
Rory has a comment here. He's mentioned that he would like to compliment the ADWR staff on the water calculator for golf courses. It's a great tool.
Thank you, Rory. We think it'll definitely be helpful in helping kind of individual courses understand a little bit better the impacts of this proposal. So thank you.
No additional comments or questions. Oops, sorry, I spoke too soon. Question here from Jeff Lee. Where will all of the written comments and submissions be posted?
Great question. Thank you, Jeff. So that is actually part of why we are designing this 5MP concepts page. So there's not really a great place currently on our website for those types of things. So part of that 5MP concepts page that we keep mentioning is going to be not just the concepts that we've discussed in these subgroup meetings and work group meetings, but also the stakeholder feedback, a place for us to post the stakeholder feedback and written comments that we have received, so that there's one comprehensive place for both information about the concepts and the types of feedback we've received on those concepts.
Thanks, Natalie. Comment here from Terry Sue. She's mentioned likely the non-use of new turf allotment is due to the lack of knowledge of its existence and not because people don't want to use it.
Okay. And we acknowledge that that's a possibility. We're certainly open to additional comments and discussion on that item. Thanks, Terry Sue.
Thanks, Natalie. No additional questions or comments.
Thank you, everybody. I do appreciate the kind of robust discussion we're having here. We appreciate that. We'll go ahead and move on. This next item is really just something we wanted to introduce. It's something that we will have a more full discussion at a future meeting. But we wanted to kind of just put this out there so that it's on all of your radar, so that you all can begin thinking about it, and so that if there are any thoughts on there, that we can start kind of considering those things in how we might discuss this in future meetings. So if we could go to the next slide, please. We have talked a lot about golf courses and have not talked really yet about the non-golf turf facilities. So we're talking schools, parks, cemeteries, HOAs, all these different things that also have a turf application rate and conservation allotment. So something we will need to consider, something that we'll need to have discussions about in a future meeting will be how do we design that? Obviously, we can't base it on acres per hole. It's a little bit different for these types of facilities. So we are really looking for feedback and ideas on how we might design these the conservation allotments for the non-golf turf facilities or conservation programs for those facilities. One suggestion that we've received is that there might be a strategy of different application rates for different types of uses for that turf. So there might be one application rate for parks where the turf doesn't necessarily have to be super high quality, and one application rate for sports fields where you might want that turf to be a little bit higher quality. So that's just one example. That's one suggestion that we've received. We've also received suggestions about consideration of total acres of landscape for that application rate rather than acres of turf, where some kind of strategy there might build in incentives to have less water intensive landscape with that application rate. So there's certainly different types of strategies we could take here, and we really just want to start getting some of this conversation out there, start having a conversation about these things, and start having you all think about ideas of how we might approach this for the fifth management plans. So we can go ahead and move to the next slide, please. I'll go ahead and pause for another minute there for questions on that item. And yeah, thank you again for everyone's participation so far.
All right. Comment here from Andrew Hitchcock. He's commented that he agrees with Bree about irrigation renovations that will be taking place in the coming years based on the age of the courses in the valley. An updated irrigation system should increase efficiency and be encouraged.
Great, I appreciate that comment. So that's definitely something we can take feedback. We can definitely consider changing that recommendation that we listed there. That's kind of why we wanted to put this all out there. So thank you for that comment. There could also be the opportunity, as with the current management plans, there could also be an opportunity to consider different allotment additions for different AMAs. So maybe it's a good idea to keep it for Phoenix, but maybe the other AMAs don't need it. We would certainly want to consider all of those things. So there's a lot of options there. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Question here from Bree. She says that she is just curious as to whether there are a lot of non-golf turf facilities on groundwater, i.e., is that the primary water source?
Good question, Bree. I have not looked at that data recently, but I do know that there are a number of non-golf course turf facilities on groundwater across the AMAs. There are some differences between AMAs regarding the availability of those alternative sources. But even in the Phoenix AMA, there are a significant number of turf facilities that do use groundwater as a main source.
Thank you, Natalie. Comment here from Nicholas. He's commented, I like the idea of the total acres per landscape with the addition of including zoning as a way of applying different allotments. For example, residential, commercial, industrial, public parks, etc.
That's an interesting idea. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Comment here from Jeff. He's mentioned if a site is served by municipal water, a certain portion of that will be sourced from groundwater.
Great. Thank you for that clarification, Jeff. That's correct. Any other?
All right. Nothing additional right now.
Great. Thank you, Maggie. All right. Well, with that, we will kind of start to wrap up. This has been a great conversation today. I do appreciate all of you logging in today and participating throughout this process and providing all of this feedback throughout these meetings. So thank you very much for that. If we could go to the next slide, please. As we talked about before, we are kind of working through a whole process trying to work through updating these conservation programs for the fifth management plans. So we had a lot of conversation today about golf courses and introduced some ideas for the other turf related facilities. We will obviously have to come back to this conversation about turf related facilities in future meetings. And I think we'll probably need to kind of touch base again on the allotment additions at least. So I appreciate all of the feedback that you all have provided throughout this. And again, we do have an additional opportunity for feedback with that questionnaire that McKenna mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. We'll share that again in the chat box here, and that link is also available in this presentation. The presentation will be posted online, so that link will be available if you have additional comments or if you wanted to look into some additional things before you made comments. Where we know that these virtual meetings can sometimes be hard to have kind of natural conversations and work through some of these issues. So we're making an effort to provide a lot of different options for ways you can provide feedback and engage on these issues. So thank you for that engagement and for that participation. Our next turf meeting is scheduled for October 22nd. So we'll again come back to a lot of these conversations in that meeting. If we could go to the next slide, please. We do also have a lot of other subgroups and other work group meetings coming up. Our next upcoming meeting is actually on August 18th. It is a meeting of our full management plans work group. And as I mentioned, we are hoping to have that 5MP concepts page ready for that meeting, and we'll do a full walkthrough of that page at that meeting to kind of explain how we hope to use that page and hope to continue sharing information with you all to encourage the types of engagement that have been going on so far. So before I end, were there any additional questions?
Thanks, Natalie. Bree would like to speak. Bree, you're welcome to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So just one little weird thing I've noticed while looking through the data, there's not too many golf courses using groundwater that are, say, under 70 acres. But if you look at the fifth management proposal and compare it to the past 5-year water usage, they're still looking at having to reduce water. And I'm thinking, I just wanted to throw it out there that maybe we could give them an exception and give them like the base rate, because I'm not sure if we have the lowest acreage golf courses, if we should also be restricting overseeding when they're some of the lowest. And then I'd like to just throw out there about the water surface allotment. I think maybe we could look at setting some limits for those older courses on water surface allotment, just because if you look at the data there too, a lot of your top water surface allotment courses are also the older ones, and the top 10 are using about 52% of the total Phoenix AMA water surface allotments. So I think maybe in the future we can talk about setting some limits on how much water surface for those older ones.
Thanks for that, Bree. So Amanda, maybe you can jump in on this. I believe for a course that, for example, would be 70 acres for an 18-hole course, I believe that they would be in a pretty generous calculation. They may actually see some increases as compared to the fourth management plan. So maybe there's some clarification that we can do there, or maybe using the calculator once that gets posted, that can help kind of clarify some of those things. We are intending that those smaller courses would again have kind of that more generous allotment and would have a little bit more flexibility. We really are trying to incentivize that lower acreage. So maybe we can follow up on that. As for the water surface piece, yes, because those older courses did not have the same types of limitations on the water surface allotment as the newer courses, you do see higher volumes there associated with the water surface. The complication we've kind of run into with that is that the statute that we're working under for this particular conservation program does indicate that we need to consider economic feasibility. We understand that those types of water surface ponds and that kind of things can be very expensive to modify. So we can certainly have a conversation about limitations there, but it would need to be done with some caution and some eye to that kind of economic feasibility consideration. But thank you for that comment, Bree. I do appreciate it. Were there any other comments?
Thank you, Natalie. A couple more comments and questions here. A question here from Andrew Hitchcock. He's wondering, have the non-golf turf facilities been regulated in the past? Do you have an estimate on groundwater savings for those facilities?
Yes. So, well, yes to the first part, and I don't have a number right this second on the second part. So the non-golf turf facilities have been regulated under at least the third and fourth management plans. I'm not sure how far back that goes, but they have been regulated in the past. That is not a new requirement. What we're looking at doing is applying some of the things we've learned in reworking the golf course application rates to those additional facilities and reconsidering how those conservation programs are structured. So it's not a new conservation program necessarily for those facilities. They have been required to comply with a conservation allotment and report in the past. But we want to consider those requirements for the fifth management plans and how we might update them going forward. And I do not have an estimate, sorry, for the groundwater savings associated with those facilities, but that's something that we might be able to look into. And also, depending on how we would design a fifth management plans program, the kind of reductions and withdrawals of groundwater thing between the fourth and fifth management plans obviously might be different depending on how we design that.
Thank you, Natalie. Question here from Rory. He's wondering, would having the flex accounts that carry forward help courses that use reclaimed water?
I think it kind of helps everyone equivalently, I guess. The courses that use reclaimed water really have their incentive kind of in that effluent adjustment rather than with the flex accounts.
Thank you, Natalie. Comment here from Chip. He's mentioned, to Bree's point, 50% of the groundwater in the Phoenix AMA is used by courses over 130 acres.
Thank you for that, Chip.
Comment here from Bree. She's commented, oh, and I would like to thank you, Natalie, and all the ADWR staff. I feel like the proposal has shown that we have been listened to throughout these discussions, and I really appreciate your work behind the scenes and listening.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that, Bree. I really appreciate it. That's definitely something we've worked really hard on, and that's part of why all of your feedback throughout this process is really important. We do try to take things into consideration as much as we can while balancing it with a kind of our statutory requirements here. So thank you.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Bree. Nothing additional right now.
Great. All right, well, with that, then we will go ahead and close. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I really do appreciate you all logging in and providing feedback throughout these meetings. And hopefully we will hear from you all with that questionnaire form. And also, hopefully we'll hear from you all at that Management Plans Work Group meeting on the 18th. So thank you.